Hi everyone.
Hi,
It's Alicia Miller
and Dr. Doug Miller.
and welcome back to this Facebook live series called Messages from a Wounded Inner Child. What are your symptoms trying to tell you? Each day this week I've been doing a different topic on symptoms of a wounded inner child and childhood wounding.
Of which there are many
Right.
symptoms.
So,
Some surprise
many.
symptoms.
So the purpose of this series is to help you recognize your symptoms. So many of us just accept things as they are or treat them. So this is to show you that these are symptoms and something's causing it. And once you address the cause, your whole life will improve.
Yeah, a lot of treatments don't necessarily get to the cause, and then what you're engaged in is kind of an uphill battle of trying to fight the underlying cause and maybe change your thoughts or do affirmations, and that can work to an extent. But once you change the cause, those other things fall into place much easier and take a lot less effort.
Yeah. So today's topic is, or today's symptoms that we'll be covering are about relationship problems and patterns in relationships. And I invited Doug today because I need support, for one. And also, we work together. And also, we work with a lot of couples. And also, we've worked through a lot of our own stuff.
Yeah.
So I've been doing these videos every day and clients every day, and I got to the point where I just said, you know what, do you want to join me on one of these and
Yeah.
and support me? And this was a result of healing my inner child, was to be able to recognize when I need support and ask for it and receive it.
You've been putting a lot into these, and it's taking a little toll, and that's
Hi, Nancy.
fine. I'm glad to help, and I
You're
just like working with you too.
Doug's support has really helped me heal and transform who I am as well. So
And
support is so important.
It's mutual. Like she does, like you do for your clients. You fought for me even against myself when I didn't want to see something or felt too ashamed to face it. So that's one of your gifts, dear.
I fight for all the babies.
Yeah.
Okay, so today is on relationship problems as symptoms, and I'd like to just start by sharing a little bit because my relationship patterns was actually the symptom that first brought me to doing this type of work on myself. So I recognized that I was in a relationship pattern where I found myself in one unhealthy relationship after another consistently throughout my 20s. And I still didn't, it didn't wake me up until I had to marry a very abusive man, and I was in that marriage for 3 months until it got really scary, and that woke me up, and that's when the first time I actually had some self-awareness and reflection and said, what is making me choose these men who are not good for me?
It was like hitting bottom.
I really had to, go through something so obviously not good for me.
Even life-threatening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Margaret. So that was the event. So my relationship patterns and seeing that they were a symptom. I didn't say, oh, I have bad luck, or it's just, all guys are jerks and it's not for me, or I should just be single. Instead, I said, you know what, there's something causing this. I'm choosing these men for some reason, and I wanted to understand that. So I actually went to an experiential therapy course, and I consistently went there for many years to really help me see all of these unconscious patterns of relationship, where they come from, and help me process my repressed emotions and start to take care of myself. So that's
Yeah, yours was kind of an
mine.
abrupt sort of awakening into the work, and then the work helped you get there. Whereas for me, I think I brought, like we all do, you know, some childhood patterns into my adult relationships. I had some Gestalt therapy that was excellent when I was 13, just a few months, and then I had a full year when I was 17. And with that, one of the main things people ask in Gestalt therapy, what therapists ask is, you know, how do you feel right now and how do you feel in your body, and to increase that kind of emotional and bodily awareness. And when I think back, how I wish we could teach our kids that at such a young age, because it's really served me. And in regards to relationships, I got into, I was married for 15 years before this, and had other relationships. And what started, in my marriage, and I take responsibility for this, is I felt, I started feeling there was something missing, and I wasn't getting some needs met, and I started feeling more and more lonely. And a lot of that, like, it's so much more conscious now than it was at the time. And I had done the Gestalt therapy, and then I did some really intensive inner child work right before I actually got married, and some afterwards. And I think what that did is awaken me to those the more vulnerable needs and the things that I was really feeling deep down inside. Sometimes I would just feel things when I was doing the inner child. I had no idea what it was, but it was something really powerful just moved through me. And I think that awareness of how I was feeling, and the started showing me that the choices I was making in relationship and what I wasn't getting wasn't okay. And I've had multiple relationships. Some I've really ended in the wrong way. Some have been ended on me or whatever. But that was, my process was more one of kind of this internal nagging and this internal loneliness and a feeling of deprivation in the end that is associated with feeling lonely. And we've been lucky, we've been blessed, and came into a relationship that where all that could be very conscious, and where we could start expressing to one another. Now, we went through a year. We talk about this often. A year
And I say 2
year and a
years.
half. I think it felt like 2 years, but it might have been.
It may have been 2 years.
Somewhere in there. There was some real tough times, some real difficult stuff.
So, well, I wanted to.
Go ahead.
So these are examples. We get a lot of questions of how do you work through this stuff, or see patterns and things. And you can see a pattern and then start doing this work. And then you can see from Doug's story that he started doing this work, and then he could feel what was missing. He could feel his needs not getting met. And so you'll notice that you may start doing emotional healing and working through this stuff because of one symptom. And I get a lot of people coming to me for physical symptoms, and then through the work, all of a sudden, all of their needs not getting met in a relationship, they start to feel more. And then they see there's actually the pattern is beyond themselves. It's within all areas of their life. And so I wanted to say also, when Doug and I came together, we had done so much work. You were doing therapy and experiential therapy and a lot of stuff.
My own therapy
for 30 years or.
Well, off and on.
Yeah. And then I was consistent with doing this very deep work for 9 years, consistently right before we met. So we had done enough work on ourselves and healing our inner child and connection to our emotions and getting clear with what our needs are in relationship. That when I'm afraid
It's a little windy. It's also bright. So if I look like I'm scowling, it's because it's so bright
Yeah.
here. And then the wind's blowing, and Alicia's trying to make sure that thing doesn't blow over.
And then, the Costa Rican internet, so we got all these factors going on. Anyway, so I was going to say, though, we had all this resourced already, and awareness already, and we do this work. So in coming together, we knew what was good for us, but we still had to work through these painful, really deep layers of stuff that we hadn't accessed before and could only access in this type of relationship that had this safe, loving container, because we had this love for each other that no matter how hard it was, we were there, and we were there for each other and there for our relationship.
Yeah, and we've out of all that, we've kind of, and our work, we've developed this idea that it's like you kind of got to do about 50% of your own work yourself, or maybe 60%, before you can enter a relationship and not be so fully triggered. Now, there are ways to still be in a relationship, but it has to have some clear guidelines. And we started developing guidelines to get through that really tough period about how we talk to each other, when we took timeouts, what timeouts meant, that it was okay to do that, all kinds of things. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too as we go along.
Yeah.
So what's next? Symptoms.
Symptoms. So today's topic is how to recognize what symptoms are in relationships or relationship patterns.
Yeah, and I'm just going to say that this whole series has really opened up the idea of symptoms. As a clinical psychologist, there are like very specific kinds of things that are symptoms, but there's a lot of things like this nagging dissatisfaction and this feeling of loneliness. The way we argued was a symptom of our triggers and of our problems, and so this expanded idea. It's like even the clinical notion of symptoms really limits, and it says, well, it's okay just to be comfortably numb, or it's okay to do this or that, but that kind of sets a low bar and doesn't introduce enough of what relationships in life can be. And so this expanded notion of symptoms, when we came to it, not because we're like, hey, we want to make everything a symptom, we came to it out of the realization that of the connection to the emotional issues from childhood and how they manifest in all these different ways. So in Alicia's case, there was, and we could start kind of with this framework that Alicia's case was kind of overt and external and relational, whereas even though I was in a relationship, it was largely an internal kind of process that would start percolating over time and into awareness. And those are both two types of symptoms. So one's sort of acted out in the relationship or with the partner, and the other one's kind of an internal unhappiness and loneliness that could be classified as a type of symptom. So just to set up that outer inner way of thinking about it, we'd like to start with some of the more overt things.
Yeah, we'll start with my past relationships. Emotional, verbal, physical abuse. Those are obvious symptoms, right?
Yeah, and the abuse is usually doing that to control, and using anger when things don't go their way, and they use the anger to control the other person. And that's often,
And some people don't use anger to control. They use blaming and shaming the other person for having needs to control them without anger, too.
Which brings us to narcissistic abuse. Blaming, shaming. Narcissism is actually a shame-based disorder that they project outward onto others to elevate themselves. And so...
or to avoid also to...
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
And so if your partner is abusive and controlling and maybe narcissistic, that's a symptom, but it also means something about you and how you've accepted from probably early on in that relationship that that's about all you're going to get, or that that's okay. And there's a point in a lot of therapy or our work with clients where we point out, well, when in relationship work, when was that okay? Why was that okay? And then the whole notion, or even just the belief that it's okay for me to be in a relationship with someone who abuses me is a symptom. It's a problem. It's not healthy.
In my abusive marriage, oops, sorry, let me just clear this. It's not clearing.
Is it on your phone?
Yeah. Okay.
There you go. He is persistent.
In my abusive marriage, I even said at one point, I said, oh my gosh, he's so much like my father, so it's okay because I know how to handle him. So, I mean, that's just an example of why we stay in abusive relationships, is because we experienced them in that we had to make them okay as children until we feel the pain of them as adults, and then we can start healing from the original relationship.
Yeah, and two things about that. First of all, that's sort of a justification. Well, he's like my dad, and I can handle that, so look at me, I can do this. But then it's also the kind of comfort and familiarity with that pattern of behavior, because it's what you grew up with. So when we talk about those kinds of things, it doesn't feel good to be abused, but there's a comfort in it because it's all you've known, or it's what you've known in the past. So if at some point, or another symptom in a relationship is conflict and fighting, and I know we have someone that asked specifically about some of that, but there's generally the one way to look at symptoms in relationship is that there's an interruption to the intimacy, to the closeness, to the agreement that we're doing this together. And that can happen in a few ways. One is through conflict and anger, and we'll just throw abuse in there, or receiving abuse. That's not intimate, obviously. It's not close. It's not emotionally vulnerable sharing connection. Then there's dissociation, where you just checked out from each other. And like, it's normal for a relationship to have an ebb and flow of coming together and maybe doing your own thing and coming together. But this is more like the unconscious kind of habitual patterns that over time create distance and really create relationship problems and intimacy problems. Anger, dissociation is your third. Checking out, like through alcohol or through addiction. It's like dissociation, but
A third would be codependency.
yeah, where someone's needs aren't getting met and are being sacrificed.
Yeah.
So people are actually, which is what we want to talk about next. So there's anger, dissociation, and codependency. Before we talk about codependency, I just want to reiterate that, like there were times when we go do our own things, but so it's not like, oh, we're not intimate, we're not clingy, we're not together. That's not a break in the intimacy, because we know, well, she wanted to go dancing, I didn't, or I'm gonna just chill out and do some things, but that's within the context of a healthy, intimate, connected relationship. So it's not persistent intimacy in the physical sense, but everything that happens is okay, and it's not broken off, it's not dissociated, and it's not hostile, or a habitual pattern of disconnection. So getting to codependency, and it's a big topic for a long time, and it's come up a lot just recently for several clients that we have. Kind of say, if it's hard for you to say no to someone, to set boundaries and ask for what you need, it may be a sign of codependency. And what I said earlier is really important. It's like the codependent has broken the intimacy with themselves. And this really speaks to the inner child work, that the vulnerability, the needs, the wants have been disconnected from. And to have intimacy in relationship, those are the things that have to be brought in to have connection with another. Mm-hmm. So even though maybe the person who the codependent is involved with may be more aggressive or more exploitative or more negative in that sense, the codependent is sort of passively checking out of the relationship, probably because of early childhood patterns, trauma, and wounds, or a lack of familiarity with their emotions. And I know you have something to say, because I know when you have to say something. Do you need to check your phone? I'm fine.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say the codependent, when you said checking out of the relationship, it can look like more of all about the other person. So the codependent is giving up their needs for the other person and is all about the other person, needing that person to love them so they will do whatever that person wants them to do. Mm-hmm. So it's more of like this, and more engaged in the other person. Yes. than their own needs. So
it's like their inner child has checked out of the relationship. They're neglecting themselves.
They're checked out of their inner child's needs. Yeah.
Yes.
And that comes from childhood, when if you are codependent, it most likely means that your needs were not taken care of by your parents, and you had to just not have any needs, wants, feelings, and it was all about how your parents felt, what they wanted, how you had to be for them to try to get the love that you needed. And so that pattern continues. The self-neglect comes from their neglect, and then that pattern continues your whole life until you learn how to reparent yourself. So
moving right along.
Codependency is huge. I can say about 100% of people I work with are healing from that, and it's, I have healed from that. I continue to release patterns of it. It happens over time. So
yeah, I mean, we could do a whole video on just codependency.
So yeah, when you're really,
I think we covered it.
Okay.
Were there some questions that people had?
Well, there was a question about, like, someone had a hard time setting boundaries, and they don't want to let people down. And so this is one of the things that's really hard with the codependent pattern, is your feelings are really attached, like who you are is really attached to how people feel and how they feel about you.
Yeah, let me talk a little type theory.
Okay.
So most of y'all are familiar with the Myers-Briggs, or the Big Five personality variables, the Neo-Pi. And the Myers-Briggs are used to measure all that. There's generally thinking types and feeling types, and there can be kind of people that are a little bit in the middle. But most codependents are really feeling types, and just as that type of person to begin with, what's most important to the feeling type is that everyone's getting along and everything feels okay. Now, with the thinking type, it might be the truth and being right. Might be their issues, what they like to focus on. And so if they don't get along, it doesn't matter. What matters is the truth. And so they're like, well, I don't care what you say, I gotta do this way. And that could even hurt a feeling type's feelings because of the way it's presented or whatever. My point is that most codependents are feeling types, and it's very important that there's not problems in relationships. Now, what makes them full-on codependent, more so, because like feeling types can have great boundaries, and in fact need great boundaries because they're very compassionate and relation oriented and want everyone to be happy. What makes it go into kind of a problem level is when all that kind of neglect and the kinds of things Alicia's been talking about, and frankly, most people in our society haven't had really great emotional training and understand what it means to manage their own emotional lives and that sort of thing. So, I just wanted, that was a
Yeah, that was
large
great.
interjection.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I have this desire to move the camera so we're not in the dark here.
But you're not the camera person, you're the
What about that? Is that
no,
better?
see that? Look at,
Okay,
it's a lot of light happening here.
it's a lot of light. Inside and out.
All right, so
Okay.
what were you saying?
I
hope
was
didn't
saying,
derail you.
that's okay. So there's going to be a hard adjustment coming out of codependency. It's going to feel hard to start saying no and setting limits and boundaries with people who were benefiting from you always being there for them or doing what they want. And then especially for feeling types, it's gonna feel bad if they feel bad, and then they may start to blame you. And so it can feel really difficult if your source of love came from pleasing other people. So that's an external source of love, which came, of course, from childhood, where you learn that you're loved as long as they approve of you, as long as you're doing things for them that they want.
In other words, it was necessary to sacrifice your own needs and wants in order to feel loved.
Yeah.
So when you start coming out of that pattern, there's that kind of threat, but I'm going to be abandoned, I'm not going to be loved, or I'm going to be shamed.
Or I'm not loved because they're mad at me.
Right.
Right.
So that gives especially someone with any narcissistic tendency, a whole lot of power
Yes.
to manipulate and to get what they want. And God forbid that they pull away from you because you just want to get along.
Right. So that's why it's so important to do this inner child work, to heal your inner child, to go into the emotions that you need to feel, that you couldn't feel as a child, that you had to just shut down and push away and invalidate and make okay.
And to bring those into the world and to stand up for them.
Yeah.
In a healthy way, without rage, in a calm, clear way. A little anger could be okay at times, but not the kind of flying off, that actually is disempowering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in addition to the expression of all of that, there equally important is the reparenting process of you learning how to give yourself the love and approval that you need, and how to support yourself and listen to your feelings. So when you do all of that, you will change the way you feel loved. You will feel loved within, and so it won't be based of anything external. So it doesn't matter what's happening, how other people feel, what you do, how much money you have. You're like, I'm loved, and I can be me, and I can express myself and my truth.
And I can still care for others in a way that's healthy.
Yeah.
For both.
And during the reparenting process, it's important to see when you set those boundaries, you are loving yourself. When you listen to how you feel, you're loving yourself. You are valuing yourself. And so that's where our true sense of love comes from, is someone is here listening to me, and that's you. Someone is here supporting me, and that's you. So it's like, oh, I am cared for, I am taken care of. And so you feel safe within yourself and loved within yourself. Then it's not such a threat. It doesn't matter if you disappoint someone or if they're angry at you. It's like, okay.
Or if you have a need, you can simply ask for it without any confusion about that. normal way, or want, desire, anything.
Yeah.
And then if someone crosses a boundary or mistreats you, you can set that boundary very clearly because you're so clear about how you feel, kind of from the tip of your toes all the way through and through. There's not that doubt that something bad's going to happen. Mm-hmm. This takes time, and it takes that connection. And one thing that has come into our awareness recently is that it takes more than just sort of casually reparenting, even the way typical therapy occurs. Like, a lot of therapists are so supportive, and they can be so helpful in supporting a person. I think sometimes what's missed in that is that this is not an average child that just needs to be parented. This is a person who had a childhood where they were really mistreated, neglected, and I'm even to the point that we were not trained to be in touch with our emotions and how to manage them and how to bring them into the world, all that. And then you erected all kinds of defenses and adaptations, given that your needs were not going to be met, to protect yourself. So it's not just reparenting like parenting a healthy kid, it's reparenting a wounded child that really needs some effort and some focus and some the clear message that anything you feel, anything you think, any way you are is valid, important, and I'm here for you 100%. And when I say that, I'm here for my inner child 100%. And when you start knowing that in yourself, that's when a lot of stuff can really shift for you, and it takes some time.
Yeah, great. Yes, time and support. We really, really need to work with professionals.
Yes.
Everyone does, to work through the ways that we learn to be supported versus what's really healthy for us.
Yeah.
There was a question that's now up there, so I remembered it.
I love questions.
There was a question that came in. Is it possible? What about swinging the pendulum, swinging the other way? If you've been codependent and now you're in self-protection,
Is that really the other way?
I think what she means is
rigid boundary instead of fluid boundary. So
yeah, like
boundaries
like
can
not
be,
wanting to be around anyone.
Yeah. So there's three kinds of boundaries, basically. There's very porous boundaries where there's no separation from you and the other person, and maybe that's more classically codependent. There's on the other end, there's super rigid boundaries where no one can get in, and that's usually a protective, defended, fearful stance where maybe you've been codependent for a while, and you're done with that, but you haven't figured out the adaptations to relate in a more balanced way. And then the middle one is the healthy pattern, which is you have fluid and flexible boundaries where when you're real, like with your closest intimates and you're trusting and everything's good, then you can really open up and reveal yourself. And then when you go out in the world, you put up maybe a little more boundary. And then if someone like is coming at you and harming you in one way or another, that you can get rigid with your boundary and say, no, that's not okay. And so there's a fluidity, a flexibility, and an adaptability of boundaries that occurs over time. And either of those extremes suggest an imbalance and is definitely going to interfere with the relation. And both of those are symptoms of
Right.
problematic behavior.
Exactly.
And people often do switch when they learn or they figure something, or they've been wounded enough and they give up.
Yeah, I'm not going to take care of anyone anymore.
Yeah.
Or
And that can actually be an important
Yeah.
phase, but it's not an end state.
Yeah.
Like that could be a really important part of a healing phase.
Right.
You're like, I can't do this anymore because I'm focusing on myself. I'll check in with you in 6 months, or
Yeah.
honey, I need 4 months to really just focus on my stuff. I'm here for you, but I'm really going to be working on my stuff. And if you feel neglected, I'm sorry. I love you, but I can't do this. If you're in a relationship
Yeah.
and that's happening. And you need to get your stuff together because you've really hurt me.
Yeah, and if you're not in a relationship, it's important to learn how to support yourself by asking for support. So that is also a part of the healing process of healing your wounded inner child, of like receiving healthy support, knowing that you deserve to be supported. sharing, being vulnerable with safe people helps heal the shame,
Totally.
and it helps you send that message that you're,
Yeah.
good enough and lovable, and there's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah,
And
this is really important. I had 2 older brothers, and so I perpetually felt stupid. So one thing I did to fix that is I got a PhD, and now I kind of know the ways that I'm stupid. So, but what it did to me is
Honey, you're not stupid.
It's in some ways it set up a pattern of like being around men who would mistreat me or would put me down, and again, that was comfortable. It didn't feel good, but it was comfortable, and it took me years of like saying, wait a minute, when I leave this guy, I just feel really bad. And now what's going on? Looking at that. And stopping that pattern, and that's just an example. And it happened again and again, and in different ways. And I eventually learned, and now, I just don't put up with it. I'll let a guy know, or I'll stop the relationship. And I'm with people now who are generally very supportive, and honest with me, and let me know what's happening with me, but in a way that feels good.
Yeah.
If there's something I need to hear.
Yeah, and you had to let people go and align with people who are able to be there for you.
Yeah, and like even with Alicia, who has her love has this penetrating truth. Like, and if she sees you not being honest with yourself, she's going to point it out. And initially, I would be like, I felt so ashamed because she was revealing things that I didn't like about myself, and I was shamed in the past. But what I came to realize is her truth, and then her truth about me, was actually very supportive. And that was part of a process of becoming clearer and stronger in myself so that I could look at those things. And that may be even more common for a lot of men, but I know it's true of everyone. So.
Yeah, great. There's a couple more questions. Tom said, can you help what to do when emotions trigger past trauma and we relive it again?
Yeah, that's called a flashback, actually. So it's abuse causing a trigger?
When emotions trigger past trauma.
So this is where the symptom is a gift.
The trigger's a gift as
Yeah,
well.
the trigger's a gift. And what I mean by that is, Tom, you seem very clear about what's happening and why you're triggered and what it's even connected to. And as long as you have that, that's your doorway into the healing. That's what I mean by that. That trigger is a gift, even though it feels horrible. If you take it and you follow it, and Alicia and I can walk you through this process, or a therapist that really understands these things well. As long as you follow it back to that original situation, and then that's where and there's a lot to it, but one of the things is to go into your body and seeing, maybe this is often a direction it takes, is to see where you're holding that trauma, and what the messages were around it, and what the beliefs that formed around it, because it's the beliefs and the adaptations. You're just being protective of yourself.
The hurt.
Yeah, you don't want to be hurt again,
Yeah.
and whatever that emotion is, it's hurting to relive it because it wasn't safe to have it back then. And it's the unpacking of that trauma, and it's the going into it and releasing
feeling
it.
Feeling it is
Absolutely.
what releases it.
Yeah,
So if
yeah.
you're starting a trigger, you can feel emotions when you're triggered. It's not necessarily releasing the source of the trigger. So it's important to go into what is being triggered. How did I feel? What needs to be felt and said about this? And you can express it and really get it out and scream and cry and tell the person how they hurt you in terms of not to the person, but out loud. It's important to express your hurt by yourself, for the healing of it, which will resolve it.
Yeah, and virtually every trauma has some aspect where some part of you was threatened and or violated, and accessing that violation can be very scary, but when you're held right and it's done in the right way, that's as important too. And then once you release that, when that same emotion comes up and it doesn't feel good, you're not coming out of that reactive fear any longer, but you're able to say, hey, this doesn't feel good to me. You know, and yeah, it may be what your dad or your mom or whoever it was.
Well, there's other things that he's sharing that
okay.
is kind of all related. Like, how do we cope?
Well, more information would be helpful.
Yeah, how do we cope when we don't get closure in relationships? I have anxiety or panic attacks. It happens very often. I don't know if it's being stuck emotionally or living in the past. So all of this, Tom, all of those are symptoms. So what you're sharing are all symptoms of unresolved trauma and hurt that needs to be felt and processed and cared for.
And there's a lot of fear in there. That's a lot of anxiety and fear.
It would be important to work with someone to help you and support you through that process of where this all comes from and what you need to do to process it within yourself. And then Keller had written saying about the pendulum swinging when you're codependent. Now, thank you for sharing more, Keller, because totally. She shared that you have to really change it up when you recognize you have been codependent in many relationships. That you do have to let people go who have been taking advantage of you and who aren't there for you, and you're recognizing that. And she shared that it's necessary but lonely, which is so true. We all go through that period of getting out of these patterns and having to let go of how we've been relating to people and jobs and everything. And then that lonely period is an opportunity to really take care of yourself. So then from that place, you'll feel more supported, you'll feel that you deserve to be supported, and you can be more discerning with who is supportive.
And even the loneliness itself, being able to live alone and to say, I'm okay, hey, look, I can take care of myself. Then the need to be in relationship at all costs, that's characteristic of the codependent, goes away too. That's actually part of the healing, that loneliness.
Yes. Okay, so what other
there was one about fighting.
Let's address that now.
So
there was
got a question that there's a lot of fighting going on in this relationship, and it was described as almost like an addictive pattern. I forget the exact word.
So the question is, how do you deal with and keep focused on your own healing and feeling safe when both partners are constantly triggering each other with the wounds and reacting and the trauma, and it's a very enmeshed codependent relationship, and they're addicted to, I guess, that pattern and trauma and being bonded to each other, and so she wrote that she can't stop the pain and fighting. How do you demesh and self-differentiate when the addictive pull is so strong?
Well, it's definitely, when we describe these kinds of relationships, and pretty much all relationships, but this really fits for this one, it's like two minefields moving over each other, and it's just this mutual triggering that really quickly, I'm sure, just starts feeling really out of control, and you feel stuck, and you get over and over and over again. And the way to do that is there's several things that can be done, and I'm going to help and make a few suggestions. One is to start slowing the whole process down. So as soon as one person starts feeling triggered, the other person just stops. And you may need a timeout at that point. You may need to take some time apart and each figure out what's going on, where you're at, come together, maybe have just one exchange of back and forth. And if you feel that energy level, like that trigger level, like on a scale of 1 to 10, going above a 3 or 4, that's again when you need to take time out. Because as long as you're in that mutually triggered state, nothing, as you know, as you know, and as we know,
We've-
nothing good's gonna come
I
of
was
it.
going to suggest seeking help because
Yeah.
we've had to,
Yeah.
we were in those places a few times where
You-
no matter what
Yeah.
each would say, we were coming from such different places and the other couldn't hear because of,
Yeah, and despite
know.
how much I had healed and all the work I did, sometimes it would take me 3 days before I was like, oh, wow, I was a real butt. You know, I mean, I was that defended, and it was that much of an old pattern, and I needed that much protection.
yeah. And I insisted that
But
we
what I really wanted to, getting some
would go to someone so you could hear it from
Yeah,
someone else.
totally.
That's what
And
helped
that's
us break through it,
Yeah,
those times.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. But one thing is to just create as safe a space as you can. And what that means is like, as soon as that trigger comes on, take your time apart and use that, again, as a gift to each one tracing back where it came from.
So-
And you may need some help with that, and that's, we all do.
Yeah.
And so that's one, that's
So
really
to-
like
Yeah.
for now, I don't
For
know.
that, it's great to have an agreement. So for both of
Ahead of
you
time, yeah.
to sit down and say, okay, I notice like when we reach this level, like 3 out of 1 to 10, it's just, spirals and nothing
Yeah.
good comes of it. So when we do that, let's have an agreement that it's okay to take a break, and it's okay like for us to go in separate rooms
Yeah.
and gather our thoughts and process emotions, or really like get clear on what's happening, what
Yeah.
you need, what's been, what is your need basically.
Yeah.
And then you can have an agreement when you're not triggered to talk about it,
Yeah.
and one at a time, where one person talks while the other person listens and reflects. I hear you, feeling this way, and validating their experience and their feelings. And then the other person gets to do that and come to a resolution or agreement or a solution of how it could be different, or how you're, can react.
A lot of it's about setting up ground rules that help contain the trauma, the neglect, the wounds of the past, and create a safe space so that it doesn't keep happening. Slowing it down, taking time, allowing that emotion to process, not in anger, but in what's actually behind the anger, and what's actually being protected. It's like, well, and there were times when I was like, I was really feeling ashamed, or I was really feeling afraid and vulnerable, and instead, like, I called you, bitch or something, and what I really wish I said is, I was afraid, and I was really feeling threat. So you can also allow yourself, this is what I wish I said. Is what we call it. This is how I wish I said it, and that could be 2 days later. But what you're starting to do is build in the better patterns of communication, and setting up some structure so that the inner child is starting to feel safe. The emotions and the vulnerability are
And
starting
you're
to
taking
feel
care.
okay.
You're taking care of your inner child.
Yeah.
So that is that. If you're not taking care of your inner child or your emotional
And you're just
needs,
defending them in
and
rage.
you're just projecting your needs onto the other partner, that's going to keep the cycle going of this fighting and blaming. And so it's really important for you to take care of what is it that you need, what is being triggered within you, what does this remind you of, what do you need to feel or be with, what do you need to give to yourself. And again, working with someone can really help you with
And then
that.
you probably each need to do your own work
Yeah.
individually too, and reach that kind of 50-60% point. And then as you do that together and you learn these other skills, you can really help each other heal and be there in the relationship in a way that heals as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've covered a lot, and
Place to stop.
we have just a few other symptoms of relationship.
We have symptoms. We still have symptoms. Yes, we still have some symptoms. And like, life is a fluid, like people think like, oh, you figure it all out and you never have a problem. Life's just not like that. Like, different situations, timing, moods, events come up, relatives visit, things come up. And it's okay, but once you learn some of these basic skills, nothing lasts forever, and
And it will get shorter and shorter,
and also it
less
doesn't
and
get as
less,
intense.
and, yeah.
And
You can work it out
and so
immediately.
cut yourself some slack
Yeah.
too, and don't imagine this imagined ideal. I mean, life still brings things.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, just other symptoms to recognize when in relationships that there's a sign of a wounded inner child, sign of needed much deeper emotional healing. If you or your partner or both are lying, cheating, so it's really important to know that these are symptoms. Lying and cheating are symptoms of something, you know, that you're protecting and hiding, or if your partner's lying and cheating, it's a symptom that you're not getting your needs met, and you're allowing that to happen.
Yeah, and going
as
back
well.
to that rule we spoke of at the beginning, that if that lying and cheating certainly breaks the intimacy, you know. And,
Trust.
yeah.
Safety. Okay. Do you want to read any of these?
No, I don't.
I
You
think
wanna list
we
them?
covered.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. All right. Well, do you think my symptoms would be greatly reduced if I lived in Costa Rica? I think.
Hella yeah.
I think everyone's symptoms. I think a lot of symptoms would just disappear.
We feel better.
Well, and you know, things down here are much clearer too. So a lot of like the stress of the city and the, you know, the like buzzing and stuff, you can't get clearer around
Not everything's easy.
a lot of your
either.
stuff.
Not everything's
So when
easy.
you're here, you'll get clearer on your issues.
You have to come and see.
So come
That's it.
on.
Yeah.
So we are doing our immersions here, and we offer healing vacations for couples or an individual. So these are private, it's not retreats, it's just a private immersion where we do our experiential therapy.
Very intensive. The immersion is 8 hours long, working with one client at a time or with a couple over 2 days. Very focused, very thorough, goes into the whole past, and a lot. We have a webpage, but
Yeah,
then,
but you could go to
then
our website.
We're also
about
offering
it,
like
so.
up to a 5, 6, 7 day stay where you can relax, enjoy the area, and do some follow up work. And
Integration.
Really
Yeah.
bring things home, literally bring things home and in yourself,
Yeah.
so that you really get it. And really, we love the immersion work because it's powerful and highly transformative, and it always involves some follow up. And being able to do it in person over a week is fantastic.
Come on, Keller. Yeah. So, yeah, let us know if you have any questions. And we're also doing remote sessions from here. So if you're in a relationship or having relationship problems, we can help you out. So let us know.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for joining,
Yeah,
everyone.
thank you.
And remember, your symptoms are a gift.
Yeah.
Bye.